Hi, welcome to another session on our Microdosing and Psychedelic Retreat Summit from Heart Mind Institute. My name is Dr. Fleet Mall, founder of Heart Mind Institute, and your host for this interview and this summit. And I'm really happy to be here today with Tiffany Hurd. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you so much. Yes, very excited to be here as well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad we could do this. So I'm going to share your bio, and then we'll jump right into the conversation. Sound good?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. So Tiffany Hurd is a microdosing advisor, business leadership mentor, and head of partnerships at Golden Rule Mushrooms. A leading voice in psychedelic leadership, she brings over a decade of experience helping individuals and teams harness the power of microdosing for healing, growth, and peak performance. After 16 years in corporate healthcare leadership, Tiffany turned to microdosing to overcome burnout, anxiety, and depression, successfully tapering off of Adderall and Lexapro. The personal transformation led her to launch a microdosing coaching practice that has since guided over 500 people in cultivating clarity, creativity, and emotional resilience. At Golden Rule Mushrooms, Tiffany leads education, partnerships, and community engagement, merging neuroscience-informed protocols with conscious leadership development. You were working in corporate healthcare, and I assume you were working really kind of in the corporate, really higher level corporate of that, which is really a setup for anxiety and burnout in so many fields. And especially as things have become more tech driven, I know a lot of people have worked in the med tech space and gotten pretty burnt out. And as you shared, and I appreciate your transparency and honesty that you were able to taper off of Adderall and Lexapro. And so what was the turning point? How did you discover microdosing, or what inspired you that you needed to make a change and so forth?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the turning point for me was really coming to the arrival that I was just completely burnt out. I was exhausted. I was tired. I was kind of just utilizing these medications to really get through the day. And while I was very successful in that career, I was working in corporate healthcare leadership roles, executive roles, Fortune 500 companies, climbed my way all the way to the top. And there were parts of it that I really enjoyed. I loved learning. I loved leading. I loved the challenge and the sales and the business development. But it was exhausting in a lot of ways, and it was almost just never enough, and it wasn't sustainable. And so I remember feeling like I was succeeding on paper. And like I said, I was climbing the ladder and I was, going into higher roles, and I loved that. But on paper, I was really losing myself inside in a lot of ways. And so microdosing started to come into the field. I was working in therapy, or I was working with a therapist. And I was doing a lot of personal development work and leadership work, and was doing a lot of self-growth and a lot of inner healing. And it was really amazing at the time, and really beneficial for what I needed with what both of those outlets were providing. But there were deeper aspects, the root aspects that I was not reaching, and started to hear about microdosing. This was about 10 years ago, and nothing was really mainstream in the ways that it is today. So there wasn't a lot of information out there, but I had access to a trusted resource. I learned enough to feel like this was an avenue that I wanted to explore. And so I did. And the goal for me personally was I wanted to taper off the medication. And so microdosing really became that tool for me to really slowly start to taper off those medications. And I started to really reconnect with my own energy, with my own creativity, with my own emotional balance, so to speak. And so really this shift wasn't just about removing the medication. It was more so about rediscovering my truth and my intuition and my confidence and my worth and my ability to lead in a new way that wasn't just completely in a career that I was unfulfilled in. And so it inspired me to begin supporting others and creating a microdosing business around teaching people how to microdose in, the intentional ways and the effective ways that I wish I had at that time when I was really struggling to find the resources. And so, I ended up supporting people and did that one-on-one, and then it turned into groups, and then it turned into working with teams and companies and leaders and individuals, and it's been fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And did you start off with a particular protocol, with a particular plant medicine?
I did. So I started to microdose every other day. And I did that with psilocybin mushrooms. And I started with about 100 milligrams of psilocybin mushrooms. And I didn't start tapering right away. I started to microdose for 2 weeks and just started to see how I was responding to bringing in a new substance while still taking the medication. And I would take the medication about 2 hours apart from the microdosing. And I started to feel good. And I said, okay, this is feeling nice. And about 3 weeks in at this point, I tapered 5 milligrams off one of the medication. My prescribing physician was involved and was alert and aware that this was a process that I was exploring, which I highly recommend for people if you do explore that route. And I did it in about 3 months, which is unlikely for a lot of people, but for me, it worked and it went really well.
Yeah, I think that can be an issue for a lot of people. Maybe we'll explore that more today. People who are on some kind of SSRI and they're looking for healing and support, and they've been dealing with depression or anxiety, and so they're treating that with SSRIs. And how do you make that shift and so forth, and whether there's any contraindications to be doing both over a period like you were able to taper off. So obviously being under the care of your physician, your prescriber, your psychiatrist in terms of that part of it, I think really, really key and really important. So, there's not a lot of research on microdosing yet. There's, both Paul Stamets and James Fadiman have collected a huge body of first-person report, qualitative data, I think something like 30,000 reports each or something. And I know that has led to a major journal article published by Paul Stamets and others, I think in Nature, a major peer-reviewed journal. And I think now there are randomized clinical trials in the works that are going to be funded and pursued. And we know a lot more about, from research on psychedelic assisted therapy with psychoactive dose, where there is a psychoactive effect. And but I think we do know something about how microdosing works. So I'm wondering if you have a sense of how what microdosing is doing in the body, in the brain, and to have the salutary effects that it has for so many people.
Mm-hmm. It's a great point. And yes, more research on microdosing is needed and it's up and coming, but there is enough to sort of confidently share that there are a lot of similarities from a therapeutic dose to a microdose in some ways. And so it is really exciting to see that come to life, and there's a lot more awareness around it. But the way that I like to kind of view it is I often say that microdosing is both neuroscience and soul work. And when we speak about that from a neurobiological perspective in terms of what's happening in the brain, what's happening in the body when we work with these medicines, like I said, high dose, of course, more effective in a lot of ways, but low dose is also showing some success, is it's activating our serotonin 5-HT2A receptors and our dopamine pathways. And this is also reducing inflammation in the brain. So when we think of somebody who's very anxious or symptoms of depression or high levels of stress, chronic pain, a lot of that is creating an imbalance of the serotonin and the dopamine pathways, but it's also increasing our inflammation in the body. And so the fact that this kind of reduces it is huge for people, which means it lowers our cortisol levels, it lowers our stress levels, and that becomes a lot more effective in a lot of ways. It's also supporting our brain's neuroplasticity, which we all have. And this is our brain's ability to form new connections and new pathways. The left and the right hemisphere of the brain starts to communicate. It's signaling more in the areas where I like to describe it as maybe you're stuck in a pattern or you're kind of in this overanalyzing thought loop. And that's almost one pathway that the brain is going down. That's one thought, that's one experience that's on repeat. Now, when we work with these medicines, all of a sudden there's these new pathways that are being established and executed, that one that's been on autopilot can start to have options. And this is where we really start to see people having new perspectives, or if we bring back back the example of symptoms of anxiety or depression, where you're stuck in that same experience, all of a sudden you're viewing it much differently. And that creates a lot of freedom and healing for a lot of people. So, I would say emotionally, it starts to kind of soften the noise. We all have this tiny almond-shaped part of the brain called the amygdala. And it's tiny, but it's very loud. It's a very active, fearful response that we have in the body. And that actually starts to quiet down, which allows us to reconnect with our body, slow down, get present. And rather than reacting in a way that's from a fearful place, oftentimes we can slow down and actually get clear on what we're feeling and then respond from a place that's a lot more truthful. So that's very powerful with what we're seeing here. Of course, that's, like I said, more directed towards a high dose. But what's fascinating is what we're seeing is microdosing is actually even elongating the neuroplastic window after a high dose, depending on the medicine. But we usually see about 1 to 2 weeks, that window. It's like this critical learning period after a higher dose of medicine where your brains are more neuroplastic and open and malleable. And you're more open to making changes, behavioral changes, habits, things like that, where microdosing actually will elongate that process, which makes it a lot more effective for a lot of people to do that integration work, which is fantastic.
Yes, that points to the fact that microdosing can be a protocol both for preparation and follow-up integration with higher dose therapeutic usage of psychedelic medicines. But just to still focus on the research for a minute. So obviously there's a lot of qualitative data showing that microdosing is creating very salutary effects for people in terms of anxiety, reducing the effects of anxiety or the symptomology of anxiety and depression, improving mood, improving performance, all these things. This is what people are reporting. This is clinical report data from people. And we do know something about the neurobiology of these effects with higher dose. So are we still just kind of extrapolating? Well, we're getting these clinical results from people. We know something about the neurobiological mechanisms of this within higher dose psychedelics. So that's probably what's going on with microdosing. Or do we have actually any neurobiological research data that demonstrates that microdosing per se directly increases neuroplasticity or reduces inflammation?
Mm-hmm. It's a great point. There's some slight research coming out, but I would say the majority of that in terms of directing towards microdosing is more citizen science, personal experiences. There's some recent studies that have come out where with psilocybin mushrooms, it's supporting with health longevity, which is pretty fantastic. There's one that came out in June. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it was directed towards LSD and even with microdosing, where it's also doing similar effects. So I know there's a lot of research up and coming right now with microdosing, and just based on where it's at and the phases that it's in, it is showing some promising outcomes. Which will be interesting to see, especially when it comes to comparing these outcomes with the high dose in comparison to microdosing research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and certainly, I mean, there is a lot of qualitative data showing that people are benefiting in specific ways, and it does make sense to extrapolate from the research on higher dose that there likely are some similar mechanisms in place. We should acknowledge, though, that even with higher dose and all the research that's been done, all the clinical trials with higher dose psychedelics and plant medicines, we don't really know for sure what the mechanisms of healing are. There's research pointing in the direction of some suppression of the default mode network, some increase in neuroplasticity, some reduction in inflammation in these things, but the research is still ongoing. So I'd like to talk about two different aspects of the citizens' research, the qualitative data from Fadiman and Stamets and others is demonstrating that a lot of people are benefiting and a lot of people are doing it. Enough people are doing it that probably if it was purely some kind of collective placebo illusion, that probably would have started to wear thin by now, and people wouldn't keep doing it. I've taken a lot of supplements that are supposed to do something. Boy, I've never felt anything from it. And sooner or later, I usually, although there's some things I take because there's research and I don't necessarily feel it, immediate fix, but in general, I feel I'm probably healthier. But at any rate, people are taking it to reduce symptomology from things they're suffering from, and people are also doing it for performance enhancement, right? And you come from the world of leadership, and I know that there's some attraction to the microdosing movement among leaders and people who really want to optimize their performance at work and in their businesses and so forth, and in a lot of areas where they just want to be more competitive, and that some kind of cognitive enhancement will help them be more competitive in these areas of life professionally. So, but I think you've pointed to the fact that even underlying all that for leaders, we all struggle with issues of self-worth. There are a lot of things that can undermine our performance. That are things that often you think of in terms of the healing aspects or just general personal development aspects. So I wonder if you could address, and you've been working with leaders for a long time, the importance of how this may address some of those issues.
Mm-hmm. When we think of leadership and we think of people in companies and in high leading positions, but oftentimes there's burnout that can come from it. And if I use my personal experience, this isn't for everybody, but this was part of it, right? And so much burnout and overdrive comes from fear and scarcity. And so I think a lot of this can come from like the belief that maybe we're just never enough. And I find that microdosing with myself and many leaders and people that I've worked with is it helps dissolve that layer, and it starts to open the door to more innovative ideas and perspectives and more confidence and more self-worth to lead from this more integrity space. And so I've really seen leaders shift from being very reactive and rigid to be more grounded and present and more collaborative and compassionate with the people on their teams. If I think of an example, a CEO that I worked with, right, it went from being in command and control, sort of speaking, and having that leadership style and having this shift to a more empathetic, sensitive sort of space. And not only did that help improve with his team's performance, but it also supported with, employee retention and the creativity within that dynamic really soared because people felt safe to bring their best ideas forward. And it really gave other people permission to also feel like their voices and their perspectives were contributing to making a difference. And I think that that's a ripple effect that I see happen with microdosing from a leadership perspective, but also just from a company and a business perspective as it relates to, that self-worth and that leadership that it can really provide in a lot of ways.
And I would imagine it led to a happier leader as well.
And that too, yes.
We know that there are very successful people in the world, very successful people who are not very happy. And part of what's driving their success is that sense of scarcity and often feelings of unworthiness. And there's a high low, there's waiting for the other shoe to drop because the world is very competitive. And so you can be driving yourself to high levels of success, but not be very happy. And doing that at the expense of your health, at the expense of your relationships, your family, and so forth. So what you're suggesting here is that microdosing, maybe combined with good coaching, could lead leaders to lead in a more effective way that's not only going to be more effective for their teams and their outcomes, but also going to lead to them having a happier, more balanced life.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, so, you're working in the professional sector, the corporate sector with this, and microdosing can be seen as an enhancement, maybe combined with traditional executive coaching or other types of leadership coaching to do what we were just talking about. However, at the same time, microdosing, for the most part, is not legal yet. Maybe it's kind of borderline somewhere, in some of the states where plant medicines are being decriminalized, like Oregon and Colorado. So, I mean, how does that work in the world of, top leadership in major corporations can't exactly risk, there's real risk can be involved in something that's not yet legal. And I realize that, it doesn't look like governments are super interested in enforcing anything around this yet, because obviously there's a lot of data. This is not hallucinatory. This is not psychoactive. It's subperceptual. It's really being used in a supplemental way. But nonetheless, the risk is there. So I'm wondering how that works in terms of this being kind of out of the closet out there in the corporate world.
Mm-hmm. Great question. And I get that question a lot is how are you working and how are you bringing and weaving microdosing in the workplace, essentially? And again, we're not going to Fortune 500 companies. Of course, there's a whole approval process and an HR process that has to go through. So it's more so, startup companies, small companies that are still within that sector. But the approval process isn't as challenging in a lot of ways, so to speak. And that's kind of one piece. Another piece is, if there's anything that's in person, doing it in a space where it's on decrim land, which is obviously necessary and helpful and creates safety for everybody, legally speaking, of course. And then anything else could be virtual for the most part. And that's also very successful. But more importantly, when I work with executives and teams, I don't frame it as microdosing as a drug at work or we're working with a drug. It's more so I frame it in the way and because it's a tool for conscious leadership, right? It enhances focus and reduces reactivity and fosters empathy, which what we've kind of spoke about already, can completely change organizational culture and leadership. And so that's a space that I love to come from. But even beyond that, I also prepare them and educate them around microdosing, which is, the value and the benefits and the outcomes of combining neuroscience innovative tools with their specific goals and their company vision. And so this really sets the tone. It creates the safety, like I mentioned. It starts to open them up to start to reach that kind of full potential in the ways that we work together with, essentially cutting edge neuroscience, personal leadership development, and business optimization practices. And it's more so if you're bringing like a mental health benefit in, or you're bringing a coaching benefit into the company, I want to say this is no different just because we're bringing in a psychoactive that's a very subperceptual component. But of course, when we look at that through the lens of legalization, then yes, there is a separation. But it's more so coming from a space of coaching and bringing that in, which allows the access to really be created in the space.
Yeah, and certainly Paul Stamets and others, James Fadman and others, proponents in this space of subperceptual, non-psychoactive microdosing, envision a day when this will be an ingredient in lots of supplements and be perfectly legal, and there's really no reason for it not to be. But we are currently in this kind of gray area where something that is not yet completely legal is really out there in the world in a major way, and it creates kind of an interesting environment. And we always repeat in the summit that we're doing this purely for educational reasons and not promoting anybody doing anything illegal. But we are in this evolutionary transition and see where this is going. It does seem that these things, I mean, in some ways, the whole world of supplements altogether, there were times when I think certain elements within the government, certain agencies influenced by Big Pharma Library were trying to suppress the world of supplements altogether. And I also think the mainstream medicine, the AMA and others. And I think at some point, I remember seeing data, this is quite a few years ago, that the citizens generally were spending 60% of their healthcare dollars on alternative medicine and supplements and alternative medicine providers. So, I mean, I think this had to really wake up the conventional medicine sector. And of course, today we know that the supplement and alternative medicine and integrative medicine is widespread. So I think if this is something that the citizens want, right, sooner or later its day is going to come in terms of complete legalization. So,
well, and what's interesting too is there was a survey, a national survey by RAND.org, and this was in 2023. An estimate of 8 million American adults had reported that they use psilocybin. And there are nearly 50% of those people reported that they were microdosing. So we can see that the amount of people that are starting to work with these medicines, and those aren't even including everybody that filled out the survey. So to your point, yes, it is very interesting to view that and then also look at that through the lens of how many prescriptions are being written each year, which is absolutely insane in a lot of ways.
So you've been a microdosing coach. You are a microdosing coach, and you've guided a lot of people. So let's talk about protocols for a minute. I know there's different protocols out there. You started with every other day. There's the Stamets stack and protocol. Then there's the Fadiman protocol, and these are very different. So I'm sure there are different options, but how do you approach that with people in terms of how they approach microdosing? I suppose psilocybin is the most commonly microdosed plant medicine currently. I know there are other possibilities, but so how do you approach that with people?
Yeah, so I'd say psilocybin, LSD, and San Pedro, which is an up-and-coming medicine to microdose with. Those three are fantastic and are utilized for many different reasons, commonalities, of course, but there also are differences between all of them. And so that's really important when it comes to somebody choosing which medicine or substance, however you view it, that they would start to microdose with. But even beyond that, that also coincides with what protocol they might also choose that would be in alignment and in congruency with their schedule and their intentions and their goals and what they're really looking to receive and experience. Or if somebody's on a certain medication, what substance and what protocol might best support that individual. Now, it is very individualized. So what might work for your friend or your family member, protocol, or even medicine-wise might not be the same experience for you. In fact, it probably won't be. So just keeping that in mind. Now, I would say the Fadiman protocol, like you mentioned, is fantastic. Of course, James Fadiman has a ton of research on that. It was the first protocol to come to the space. Paul Stamets is also incredible with a ton of research as well. The Microdosing Institute sort of created this one day on, one day off, and that has a lot of research from Dr. Fadiman as well, which is great. I think a lot of people started to create protocols where there's the weekday protocol where people are microdosing throughout the week and they're not microdosing on the weekends, or vice versa, where they're microdosing on the weekends and not on the week. So what I always suggest is, what are your goals? What are your intentions? What are you looking to experience and receive? What's your lifestyle look like? And what days do you think that you would want to microdose? And that usually creates some structure and some clarity around what avenue might be best to explore. Now, especially people that are new, they may want to avoid microdosing because they're not sure of how it's going to feel. And there's a lot of fear around, okay, I can't microdose while I'm working and things like that. So I always recommend the first and second day of microdosing that you have an open day. It's free. You just kind of see how you feel, see how you respond. But you'll be pleasantly surprised that you actually can work and microdose, and you can do all things in life with microdosing. So I share that because when it comes to choosing a protocol, it's not like microdosing days are going to take you out of your day and take you into this experience that's going to hold you back from a lot of the things that you want to experience and receive throughout the day. It's contributing and it's supporting you, and it's something that is a tool and a resource that you can really work with. So that's certainly the approach with protocols and potential medicines. And I love to always anchor into these five resources, and one being safety, right? So understanding any contraindications that we spoke of. These are all kind of things that you might explore before choosing to microdose. Is just making sure that that's present. Sourcing high quality medicine, of course, that's also really valuable. Intention, like I said, going into it with intention. And I always like to suggest adaptability and individuality, because it's, like I said, it's not a one size fit all approach. And knowing that you may start with one dose and that may not feel good, and you may need to adjust and adapt, which is very common for most people, until you find a dose that's calibrated that feels very good to you. And then, of course, integration. So what I love with microdosing is you integrate as you're microdosing throughout the day, and you're implementing things. And it's not like you have to wait until the experience is over. You get to make these changes as you're working with it throughout the week.
So when you're working as a coach with folks, you're helping them find a protocol that works for them in a kind of individual way. And it could relate to if they've been involved with other medications, any contraindications, how you taper, all that kind of thing, which you mentioned before. And of course, if somebody's been on psychiatric or currently on psychiatric medications, their prescriber should be involved in the conversation, obviously. You know, and I'm sure a lot of this is still shaking out in terms of people figuring out which protocols are best. And as you said, that could vary between different plant medicines like psilocybin, and Watchum or San Pedro. And of course, LSD is not really a plant medicine, although it may originated with ergot possibly, but it's more of a synthetic psychedelic substance. What about combining them with other things? You know, we have the Stamets stack, and so he promotes including lion's mane mushroom and then niacin, and he feels that distributes the microdosing more universally and widely in the body. So I wonder if how you work with that, whether you work with integrating microdosing with any other supplements in your practice.
Mm-hmm. I love the Stamets research on the niacin and the lion's mane. It's fantastic. And even beyond that, opening up the stacking methodology with microdosing that he pretty much created for us to have that data and research on. And so whether it's niacin and lion's mane, those are so fantastic for the brain and the body. But I would even say other adaptogen functional mushrooms that are non-psychoactive are incredible as well. Reishi, lion's mane, of course, turkey tail. There's a lot, and even blue lotus is fantastic. It helps lower anxiety levels, kind of lowers inflammation as well. I would even say some people, what are the other ones? Herbs, functional mushrooms, adaptogens, cacao, ceremonial cacao, especially with psilocybin. It's a really beautiful blend. The ceremonial cacao is very heart opening, and that blended with psilocybin is very nice and very grounding. I would say in terms of physical practices, even outside of taking actual adaptogens and whatnot, outside of stacking, is pairing microdosing with breath work or meditation, time outside in nature. Maybe there's movement, physical movement, embodiment, meditation. I think I shared that already. I love to ice bath and sauna. So it's almost pairing this practice with things that are going to support lifestyle changes, but also help you feel more grounded and do more internal processing with this experience as well. And it's not always just through the lens of therapeutic speaking. Of course, there is all this incredible healing that can come from working with these variety of medicines, but also performance and creativity and openness and aliveness. So we find that from the coaching lens, especially, and even from a therapeutic perspective, if you're working with a therapist, having that support and creating these practices within your experience with microdosing or your practice with microdosing really accelerates the beneficial outcomes of working with it in many different ways. And the same goes for stacking with the adaptogens and the herbs and whatnot, is it kind of allows you to focus on something specific that you're wanting to enhance or experience or receive.
hmm So you brought up something really interesting. I'd like to follow up on. So in traditional allopathic medicine, the kind of mindset and a culture of that has been overriding the body's systems in a certain way. Like take this antibiotic, or take this pill, or take this strong psychiatric SSRI, or take any kind of drug, and regardless of what you're doing, wise, regardless of what your diet is, it's going to have its impact, right? And, you very rarely would hear from an allopathic, they might say, take this one with a meal, right? Because it might bother your stomach otherwise, But other than that, there's really no connection, or very little connection, between the delivery of allopathic medicine and medication in particulars, and lifestyle and other choices, right? And I think when we're talking about things that have more, not say that they may not have really deep and lasting effects, and they're somewhat more subtle in their action, I think, it's probably actually quite important to integrate something like microdosing with healthy diet, with other lifestyle changes, with getting enough rest, with hydration, and with things like medication and other personal evolution and self-care disciplines and lifestyle choices. So I just wonder if you could talk about that interface for a moment between the world of microdosing, both for healing and for dealing with symptomology that may be causing problems for people, as well as for performance enhancement of integrating it with other lifestyle changes.
Fantastic point. Yes, when we look at the foundations of the way that we live our lives, I would say there's a common thread of we're reaching for something, or we're looking for an outward experience to give us the thing that we need. And I feel like as a society, we've been conditioned to need it immediately and outsource it versus going inward and checking in and creating the foundations that really support our lifestyle and our vitality. And a lot of that comes from getting good sleep, drinking good water, staying hydrated, being efficient in vitamins. And that alone, before you even start to microdose, can be really valuable for people. Spending time in community, getting out in nature, getting off your phone and connecting with people. And so I always, from a coaching perspective, will ask and inquire of people's lifestyle. How are those areas? How are your relationships? And then when we start to bring in a medicine like microdosing, for example, it can help you start to lean in and create more of those attractive things that you want to create in your life, and improvements and lifestyle changes and habit changes and all those sort of things. Now, what I find sometimes when we start to microdose is something that can be really common for people is I feel a little lethargic or fatigue, or, maybe I have a little bit of a headache. That's usually such a clear indication of not being hydrated, and also potentially being deficient in mineralization. We get this question in our Golden Rule community probably 3 times a week. And the response is, okay, in the morning, spring water, Celtic sea salt, and lemon every day. In the evening, magnesium. We usually see that subside within 3 to 5 days. So that's a huge one to just be informed about. Now, when it comes to pairing this with practices and things that I spoke of, like meditation and breath work and all those fantastic modalities, that's only going to, one, make you a better human. You're going to feel better. You're going to feel more confident. You're going to feel more alive within yourself. And you're going to start to notice your relationships and the areas in your life are also starting to improve. And so I think there's a lot here for that when you really blend all of this together. And there's a beautiful approach for people to really receive when they are consistent within all of these practices.
Mm-hmm. So if someone's, workaholic, not sleeping well, eats a lot of junk food, drinks a lot of alcohol, too much caffeine, little microdosing is probably not going to create radical change for them. It's not like, taking major psychiatric medications and so forth. So it is and most people that approach microdosing probably for healing reasons are probably already in the alternative space, probably already interested in holistic health, probably already, involved in healthy lifestyle change. I can just imagine some people, if they hear about it purely for performance reasons, they could be folks who are not really in a very integrative, healthy, holistic lifestyle already.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's the amazing thing with these medicines is you can work with it from either avenue. And we see that very often, right? Such as what we've talked about today is there is this whole therapeutic pharmaceutical approach where, the higher percentage of our population only knows the pharmaceutical to be the only way of, receiving alleviation for a lot of the symptoms that they're experiencing. And why I love to talk about this topic of psychedelics and microdosing so much is it's not to shame the medication pharmaceutical process. It's more so to inform and educate that there is a alternative holistic route that people could explore. And, it's addictive free, it's side effect free. It's helping you actually get to the root symptom of why you might go on the medication or why you're considering going on the medication. And then when we look at it through the lens of exactly peak performance and innovation and play and creativity, from a non-therapeutic perspective, there's so much that's there and that's available as utilizing it as this innovative resource to kind of unlock these new creative ideas that might feel blocked or help somebody get more into their body and stop taking life so seriously and just play and have fun and just loosen up the stress and the grip. And then we also see it with performance from an athletic component. A lot of people will, and even athletes, will microdose before a training session, and they're noticing that they're more present and more focused, and even the endurance and the strength is increasing. So it's really fantastic to see it utilized in all these different ways based on, the individual and what they're looking to experience.
I'm wondering about sort of the mindset and culture around this, following up on that a little further, especially in the world of leadership and performance enhancement. I don't think there would be any resistance to someone, using a supplement of some kind. In fact, there's a lot of brain enhancing or cognitive enhancement supplements in the marketplace today. Even go to places like CVS and Walgreens, your average pharmacy, and there's quite a few of these on the shelf. So there must be very broad interest in that kind of thing. And then there's maybe some of the nootropics and some of the more refined or higher level products and so forth. So that's one thing. And if a leader sees it like, but then we also use the word medicine a lot. And microdosing and psychedelics can be associated with medicine and be considered alternatives to psychiatric medicines like SSRIs. And there may be a lot more stigma around that for someone. So it seems like almost in the microdosing movement, are we going to try to bring this into the culture as medicine, which has a whole one mindset around it, or as a supplement? Because it seems like that could make a difference, especially in the world of leadership.
Such an interesting point. Yes, I would agree. And I do think of this perspective often. And I think whether it's seen as, a medicine, a substance, or, there's probably a lot of confusion in the clinical setting of medicine because that's where it's originated from essentially. And now we're bringing in psychedelics as medicine. And I think they're all medicine in their own ways. And I think that, something I really strongly believe in is accessibility, and whether it's utilized from medicine in the clinic or medicine in terms of, say psychedelics start to reach the clinic more, if it's being served from a clinical perspective or from a retreat, indigenous, peak performance sort of experience, that may fit somebody and it might not fit the other person. So I think that having all of these options is creating more access essentially. And I think that that's serving a really valuable purpose in a lot of ways. I think ultimately, I know what it feels like to depend on Adderall and SSRIs to kind of just keep going. And I would say for anybody that's maybe in that experience and navigating this path is to just not rush it, right? Work with professionals where it suits you and find the process of, bringing in these practices And I think there's a lot there to explore within that space. And it's not about escaping the medication or whatnot. It's more so reclaiming your vitality with care and patience and support. And so I think there's a lot that we could explore within that avenue with both of those routes. But I did want to just touch on that piece that I think accessibility at the end of the day is what's going to really drive and change the way that we're working with these medicines, and having trained professionals, whether it is a trained coach or a trained therapist, that has the experience to serve in a way that's ethical and safe for these people.
Mm-hmm. Let's go a little further with accessibility, because, if we think about these as supplements for a moment, let's just on that side of it, the world of supplements is probably mostly available to people with a certain level of economic means and so forth. I mean, even really healthy food, eating organic food, eating whole foods, there can be a real accessibility issue around that. And at the extreme, in some of our economic disadvantaged areas of our city, we talk about the idea of food deserts, that it's very even hard to purchase, even if you had the funds, location-wise, geographically-wise, to find good food. And then, of course, if you have limited economic means, you're going to be spending your budget as best you can, and it's not going to be probably on organic foods, and it's probably also not going to be on supplements. Now, I mentioned before that certain cognitive enhancement, brain enhancement supplements are available even at CVS and Walgreens. So that's, a bit more accessible to most people. I don't know about the cost, but and then the other side of this is culturally, microdosing is still almost like it's like some kind of secret club or something on some level. It's like, well, what is that? And is it legal? And if it's not, then where do you get it? And how do you relate with it? And it seems like there's a certain kind of specter of elitism around the field of microdosing. And I wonder how you see that evolving and how that can be over time deconstructed, so something that does have healthy benefits can be more accessible to people.
Yes, it's such a great point, and a topic of discussion always. And, whether we view, right now access to psychedelics, a lot of it, like you touched on, it does kind of depend on, privilege and location and resources and who and who you're connected to. And, a soccer mom in the suburbs of Minnesota might have no idea what we're even talking about, or if she does, she may have no idea where to even begin. And that's very common, very, very common. And so I would say we really are in need of these three areas. And one, it's doing what we're doing today, education, and creating, the clarity and bringing in the science-backed resources that we've also touched on to make this knowledge more widely available and known to people. Of course, ethics, right? Training practitioners to really hold the safe space in the containers and really honoring the indigenous wisdom of why these medicines are even here to begin with, and taking them and moving them forward in a way that is in integrity and not losing sight of that in today's modern world. And then of course, the equity component of things, of building structures that so these tools aren't just available to executives or wellness elite, sort of like we touched on as well, but also to communities that are maybe impacted from the lens of trauma or lack of access. And without that, the movement can really risk kind of repeating the same experiences that we have had in the past, when we look at the 50s and the 60s as to why, they are controlled substances and just a few ways of viewing it from that way and beyond that. So, I think a lot of it is when I think of the role that I play at even Golden Rule Mushrooms, right? I'm their advisor. I'm teaching the community how to work with the product-based company or a product-based a microdosing product, where it's one thing to take a product or to have access to it and to try it on. And it's a completely different experience when you are with a trained professional who can teach you how to actually work with it to receive the benefits. And I think that this is what's really needed with psychedelics as we continue to increase mainstream and more people are looking to work with them, is making sure that people have the resources and the education to do so in a safe intentional and ethical way to not just honor the individual needs and the goals, but like I said, to also honor our modern and ancient ways of working with them.
Well, this has been incredibly illuminating, and I'm wondering where people can find out more about you and the coaching that you offer.
Thank you so much. Yes, so I'm very active on Instagram. I'm always sharing education. I am Tiffany Hurd is my Instagram handle, my website, tiffanyhurd.com. You can also find me at Golden Rule Mushrooms. Like I said, I serve as their microdosing advisor, managing our partnerships. We host free community Q&A calls and workshops and a ton of resources that you can be supported with. And yes, this has been an absolute incredible conversation. I'm very grateful for it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being part of our summit, Tiffany.
Yes, thank you so much as well. Really appreciate it.
Well.